Tara.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good evening. Hello, hello.
How are you?
Good. Good to see some familiar faces. Hi, welcome to Creative Conversations with Dovecote Collective. We are going to get started in just a moment, but while we wait for the Zoom stragglers to roll in, I'd love to just get a sense of who is in the Zoom room. If you want to drop in your name, your pronouns, art discipline, anything you want to share with us into the chat, we'd love to get to know you that way. And we'll get started in just a moment. All right, well, while you all are typing and hopefully, oh, great, introducing yourselves in the chat, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Kelly Olshan. I am program manager at Queen's Council on the Arts. I believe I know a good bit of you, but in case we haven't met before, that is my affiliation with Queen's Council on the Arts. I believe if you're here, you likely know what Queen's Council on the Arts is, but in case you don't, we are the borough-wide arts council that serves the entirety of Queen's artists, organizations, creative people through grant making, residencies, professional development, etc. And a monthly series of networking and discussions around critical topics in the creative sector, otherwise known as Creative Conversations. So for today's Creative Conversations, we are going to have a discussion around the intersection between art and democracy. And I'm so excited to introduce the featured presenters for this evening that are going to talk about their work and get us sort of in the right headspace to think about art as a means to catalyze democracy. So with that, I am really pleased to introduce Dovecote Collective. Dovecote Collective is a collaboration between printmakers Ondine Crispin, if you want to wave, and Helen Quinn. The two artists met at an art studio in Queens, of course, where they were next door neighbors. After the 2016 election, they were inspired to make political banners. And tonight, they're here to talk about their project, Get Out the Vote Jackson Heights, which was recently commissioned by QCA partner and friend of the family, the creative Sanctum, as part of the Catalyst Commission Project Democracy series. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Helen and Ondine.
Hello, good evening. I'm Helen Quinn and Ondine Crispin, my friend and collaborator. We are Dovecote Collective and we are thrilled to be with you this evening. And let's see here, get started. We'll be discussing our Get Out the Vote Democracy in Action project. We received a grant from the Catalyst Commission to get out the vote, to try and go hyper-local into our Jackson Heights community in Queens and see if we could get people registered to vote and to remind them about the primary elections that were on June 22nd of 2021. Now we know that 1 million people voted in that election. So 1 million people voted out of 8.4 million New Yorkers. That's 23% of registered Democrats and Republicans. And while that sounds quite low, it is higher than in the past 2 decades. So it's kind of humbling to think that only 1 million people did vote. But we we're excited to engage with our neighbors and to figure out ways to show our artwork in a way to encourage voting. The Catalyst commissions commissioned 9 artists and 5 projects throughout the boroughs, and you'll see Ondine and me at the bottom, our photographs. We were thrilled to get the grant so that we could cover the materials for the project. And what we did was we built on protest banners and posters that we had made over the past 6 years, primarily with Ondine's fabulous bird prints, her large relief prints. And we just have had a lovely time working together over the past 6 years. We've made fine art prints, things for the home, and then the protest banners and bags and shirts and posters. So Ondine's going to talk about her process of carving.
Hi. So if you don't know what a relief print is, a relief print is when you carve away the part of the image that you don't want to be printed, and then what you're left with is the image that you want that is like a raised image. So you can use wood, you can use linoleum, you can use a potato, and carve out whatever you don't want. After you carve it, you roll it with a brayer, which Helen likes to say is like a tiny steamroller with ink. And then you put paper on it and pull it off, and you have your image in reverse. You can go to the next slide, Helen. These are 2 different blocks that I was working on. The left one was plywood, and the right one is linoleum. And you can see that the image is coming forth after being carved away with the knives that I use. Next slide. This is making one of the large banners that we made for the Women's March. It's an owl, and it says, "We are watching." We chose an owl because it seemed like a feminine image, which seemed like a good thing for the time. Seems like an unusual. It felt like an unusual image for me to use, but there it is. So, and we are watching. We felt like at the beginning of the Trump administration, like most people, like pretty freaked out about what was going on with the government. And so we made these big banners that we sent to the Women's March in Boston and Seattle and Los Angeles and DC and Venice, Italy. One was sent there. You can see on the left-hand side that there's a piece of paper over the wing. That's how I check my carving as I go along. It's kind of a tidier process than trying to put ink on it and print it and wash it off every time. So while these were made for the Trump administration, unfortunately, I feel like we still have to be as vigilant for the Biden administration, so they're still pretty relevant. You can go on to the next slide. These are a bunch of different banners that we made for the Tax March and the Women's March, and I think a couple other marches in 2017. You can go on. These are just for scale. You can see how big they are. They usually need to be held by 2 people. Next slide.
So when we received the grant, we wanted to really work on our messaging and our imagery. And so we thought to look at some art history. The Russian Constructivists are always great with all this kind of diagonal lines and the action, the limited palette, the black, the red, the kind of craft paper. Sister Corita Kent, the Catholic nun activist during the Vietnam War, active in Los Angeles, had a print shop there. Fabulous use of color and text. And the Hatch Show Print House in Nashville, Tennessee. A lot of red, white, and blue. They have a letterpress that they use, which is another kind of relief print. And always love their work, and the Johnny Cash posters, all those different kind of posters. I visited there. It was really cool. And then the Mexican protest posters seem to draw heavily on the Russian Constructivist with the diagonal lines and the similar palette. I had a residency in Oaxaca in 2019, and I was really interested in the posters that were plastered on the walls. Very dynamic.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the design process. So we decided to work with bird imagery because it's kind of our brand. I chose 3 birds that live in Queens. The Eastern Meadowlark and the Carolina Wren both live here year round. And we might not see them in Jackson Heights, but we would see them in like Alley Pond Park, which is right down the road. The black and white warbler comes here for the spring, has its babies, and then goes back for the winter in Mexico and Central America. And we do see these in Jackson Heights. I also added laurel leaves to all of the imagery. In Greek mythology, laurel leaves stand for victory, success, and achievement. And I thought that was appropriate for what we were doing. Okay, we can go to the next slide. This is the, when I decided to do a Carolina Wren, I looked and found an old drawing that I had done in graphite of a Carolina Wren. So I used that and traced it onto tracing paper and added the stick that he's on. You can go on to the next slide. This is on the tracing paper, and then the image has been transferred to the block. Go next. And again on the block, and then a more fleshed out drawing to see where the black and white was going to be. On the right hand side, you can see the block has been carved. I sat outside my house on our open street on 34th Avenue and carved this one day, and it was really fun to be there and have conversations with people walking by, asking what I was doing. It was super fun. Okay, next block. This is the block on the left that has been inked up and is ready to print. You can see that it's super messy on the outside. That didn't really bother me because I knew we were going to put it in Photoshop and clean it up. The image on the right is the printed bird that you can see is a mirror image of the block. And you'll see what it looks like in the next slide when Helen talks about her process.
So after Ondine did the birds, which were really fabulous, I had the task of figuring out what they were going to say. We were in a lot of discussion about the words and should there be speech bubbles. And it was fun to cut these shapes out of cardboard. And should it just be the words? What should they say? And so we went back and forth and had a really nice discussion about that.
These are our conversations that we had people engage with us. It's one in English and one in Spanish. They both say the same thing. What do you want from your elected officials? And we were asking people to fill in what they wanted in the bubble. And this is the working on the meadowlark for the poster. You can see it was done on linoleum, and I feel like a meadowlark is always looking like has something really important to say, and I love the idea of him being like the town crier, telling everybody to vote in this election.
So then I started to silkscreen once we had all the designs, and we rented space at Shoestring Press in Brooklyn, in Clinton Hill. A lot of the print shops were closed or booked because of the COVID, and Lane Cell was really lovely to fit me in. And you can see here, this is a different printmaking process. This is a silk screen. This is a squeegee, this long wooden thing where you kind of press the ink through, and you need a screen for each color. So we had adjusted the palette, the constructivist Mexican kind of palette, from red to hot pink and from black to a dark Prussian blue. And we used the craft paper, 12 by 18 posters. So on the left, you'll see that the pink had been printed. And then on the drying rack on the right, I just was stacking, just going really fast to get 100 posters done quickly. Also made smaller prints that were 10 by 10 to give away to the people when we had our live silkscreen event in May and June. So here are some of our prints that in the hot pink and the Prussian blue. And whenever I'm silkscreening, I love the make readies. They're the test prints. So I'm pulling the print, trying to make sure that the ink is flowing, that everything is going well. And I use a large newsprint over and over. And I love the layers. It's like this chaotic conversation of the birds. And I often use the newsprint test prints as wrapping paper or just you know, in different ways. And here I wrapped up our prints, but I love how they look. We got a discount from Muji on bags. They were generous with that, and we printed the cotton bags to also give away.
And we, after Helen printed the posters, we asked local shopkeepers if we could put them in their windows. We loved on our local business thoroughfare on 37th Avenue. We loved seeing it in all of the stores. The barber shops were super supportive of us and loved having it in there. We had friends also put some in Fort Greene shops. And the next slide, I think, is they weren't open, Mockingbird, but I thought that they should have one. So I just taped one to the outside of their window. So I hope they were happy when they came and opened their store.
And Arun Venugopal, didn't he tweet about the posters?
Yes, he's a local WNYC reporter, and he tweeted that he liked the poster. That was really exciting.
So then we had 2 live silkscreen events in Jackson Heights at the Farmers Market on May 23rd and June 6th.
So we had a couple different stations set up. We had the first station that you can see here, where we're we're asking people to write down what they want from their elected officials, and in exchange, we are giving them a bag or a poster or a print. There was a funny thing that happened there, that a lot of people really loved the stuff that we were giving them, but felt uncomfortable if there was no money being exchanged. So it was interesting to do this thing without any commerce being involved. You can go to the next slide. So we got 140 responses to this over 2 days. People really, a lot of people really seemed like they had been waiting to be asked this question of what do you want from your elected officials? And a lot of people, just without even taking a breath, wrote a tome. So we have, I feel like our neighbors mostly wanted things that are really good for the community. I mean, the person on the left wants to end white supremacy in all parts of our government. Person on the right here in Spanish wants the open street to remain permanent for the sake of the children. There's housing, defunding the police, universal childcare, and simply an ability to imagine creative solutions. Affordable housing, education, restorative justice. So we were really pleased with the conversations that we had. And here's some images of all of the slides all of the conversations that we recorded. I'm going to go to the next slide. Mm-hmm. And the next one.
And then we had a separate table. We were all set up with our permit and we were very excited. And our neighbors were coming by to and from the market. And we had a live silkscreen station. And we had advertised, sort of put on different listservs to ask people to bring old t-shirts or tea towels or tote bags for a refresh. And we put our print on them. And some of the kids were helping. It was hot. So the ink was drying, but we did pretty well. So here is a little video.
2. It is. 3, 4. Okay, let's see if that worked. 1, 2, 3. Yes. Beautiful. Nice.
And then we would see people wearing the shirts around town, around the neighborhood. People brought onesies, people brought all kinds of things.
So this is, these are 2 politicians that ran for seats and won their Democratic, the Democratic primary, and they will be hopefully winning. They'll be running and winning in November. This is Shaker Krishnan, who's our local city council person, and Brad Lander, who is the comptroller. The first day, especially that we had the event, it was really fun. There was so many mayoral candidates and all the candidates were here. So we were able to talk to them and give them each a poster and have them come and look at our display of what all of the neighbors were saying they wanted from their elected officials. Here's just a couple slides of the event.
We had these clotheslines strung up between the trees, and we would just kind of put any of the wet shirts or prints or whatever was happening up, and people could kind of read from both sides.
And this is somebody that ran for Queensborough president, Jimmy Van Bramer. And he didn't win the seat, but he has a great video here talking about local elections and our poster.
And a lot of people are focusing on the mayor's race because there's a lot of press attention and TV commercials. And I hope a lot of folks are focused on their city council race because that's the most local. They get a chance to meet their council candidates, I hope. But borough president, public advocate, controller, sort of thrown in the middle there. And a lot of people don't get a chance to pay as much attention to it because they don't know what they do. And they never really get to meet a candidate for borough president, public advocate, or controller. So I love this because it's focused on all of the races because they're all important and they all actually work together. So I love this experiment in promoting democracy and the power of voting in all of the races, straight down the line. And I just want to thank you and everyone who's a part of the project for making sure that people are aware of all these races and encouraging them to vote in every one of these races.
Here's another shot of the clothesline. It was a super windy day. We had a couple times and everything flew off and we had to run across the street and pick everything up and put it back together. It was kind of beautiful mayhem.
And it felt like there were a lot of people. We were always busy. And then when we had no shirts to print, we would just print more posters. But everything went out into the world. Everything was given away.
These are the metrics from those 2 days. We probably had like 150 people come by and do the various activities that we had. And it was really wonderful to engage with our neighbors and hear what they wanted and share our artwork with them. It was great. This is our favorite thing from the day. One of our neighbors came with her daughter, who's about 6, and she printed a print with Helen on a big piece of paper. And when she got home that night, she made this collage that has a couple mayoral candidates on it and a couple city council candidates. And she asked everybody in her family what they wanted from their elected officials. So it looks like it says, Lisa wants healthcare, open streets, and green energy. Gabriel wants to save wildlife and 3K for all. James wants to protect immigrants and safe streets. Eleanor wants to clean up the poop on the street and recess for an hour, 3 days a week. And I feel like she's the distillation of the whole project. It made us so happy. This is my daughter Deja and her friend Tessa hiding from the heat under our table, eating ice cream. And you can see that we've printed Deja's pants and her shirt with our screen prints.
So then something we have to look forward to at the November election, the citywide election, is the Queensborough President's Office, Donovan Richards, has invited us to put up some of the bird conversations at this polling site at his office. So then people, as they're waiting in line or coming in and out, that they could look at the artwork and read what people want from their elected officials. So we're excited about that opportunity. And we'd like to thank a few people, Sharon Chin of the Creative Sanctum for the grant and for her. She came by both times. She's been very supportive. Queen's Council on the Arts, Artists and Craftsmen Supply in Williamsburg gave us a big discount. Shoestring Press was so kind to let us print there. Muji, and then our friends who helped us print and work with all the people at the live events, Tessa Zugmeyer, Bill Bruno, and Colin Cohnhorst. So there we go. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to your comments and questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Helen and Ondine, for that really engaging presentation. I really love the way you took us through your artistic process, your event planning process. That was great to watch. So we are going to transition into the conversations component of the creative conversations. So if you've never been to a creative conversation, it is pretty self-explanatory. We basically just open it up to talk and discuss in this Zoom space amongst ourselves. So we really encourage everyone to kind of chime in as we prompt questions. And first off, before we really dive in, or rather to dive in, really just want to open up the field for any questions that anyone might have for Ondine and Helen.
Kelly, do I stop sharing?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question? Am I allowed to butt in, or should I raise my hand? This was great. Thank you so much for sharing this work, seeing your process. I loved seeing sort of the hand work when we're in such a time of so much digital art, that it's so refreshing, and it's great to see that sort of tactile qualities that you brought out. Really excellent. I know that you mentioned a little bit of where these works are going in terms of their future being on display and that kind of thing. But I'm just wondering about any next projects that Dovecote or either of you individually will be pushing forward with.
You want to take that, Helen?
Me? Sure. Thank you so much for your question, David. That's very, very kind of you. So I'm excited because I just got an email that I got an Artist Corps grant. So I'm really happy about that. And I just applied for me personally, thinking that it was not possible to get, but I got the email. So $5,000 is coming my way. So I need to figure out how to really focus that, because I had a Queen's Council for the Arts grant over the COVID, and it was life-changing. I made these big prints about the 7 train, and it really focused me. So I need to figure out what to do with that money. I think I'd like to make some zines. I'd like to exhibit some paper mache things I'm working on. So I'm very excited about that. But Ondine and I, it's always better to work with her because we really complement each other very well, I think. So there's a possibility that we could also have a show at Danny Drum's office, our local councilman, city councilman. So we could use the get out the vote imagery again there, or we could do something new. So yes, I think it's a busy time for me, but I feel extremely creative and excited to do more work. What do you think, Ondine?
Congratulations. I didn't know that. That's amazing. That's such good news.
Yeah.
Yes, I am hoping to apply for more grants. I would love to do work on the linear park, open street outside of our house. I would love to do some public art events related to that, like maybe even printmaking in the street. I'm not really sure, but that's what I'm looking forward to.
Very cool. Any other questions for Helen or Ondine?
I have a question. Maybe it's a comment and a question. It was great to see your process, Helen and Ondine. It was really awesome to just hear a little bit about behind the scenes, and this combination of being in the neighborhood with the people, making political, making kind of political change or like advocacy, while also like working on a craft and an artistic expression. It's just it's so compelling. It feels right for the times. It feels compelling. It feels like you actually contributed to those million voters, which is amazing. And so I'm intrigued by Ondine describing sitting on the street, doing the carving, and like letting people come up and ask, what are you doing? How do you do that? And then also, making these t-shirts, which then invited people to think about their own political desires. I also appreciated, I'm sorry, this is long-winded.
No, it's great.
Helen, you showed, and I think it's for on behalf of both of you, the historical references of the Russian Constructivists. So I guess my question is, and that's also very compelling to think about historical moments that where art and politics were combined in some way. So I just wonder how much of that do you reference? Like, are you doing research about other times or other places in the world where politics and art have combined to make change, where you also, as an artist, are fulfilled? Like Helen, you're just saying, like, I'm feeling creative, which we know as artists sometimes comes and goes, And so to be fulfilled by what you're doing and at the same time contributing to political activism. I guess I'm just wondering where else you get your fuel, or like what other kinds of historical references do you rely upon, or is that part of what you're doing, or maybe it's not, it's not that important? I guess that's my question. I don't know how much of a question it is. Maybe you could comment.
I feel like it's important. I don't know that I'm doing any more research about other times, although maybe I should. I mean, I think that when we started talking about this grant, the first thing that Helen and I both came up with was Russian Constructivist, just because it's so graphic and like graphically satisfying and powerful and outrageous kind of in a way, which is great. I mean, I do feel like sitting on the street that day, making that, like, people are so drawn to making things, like so many people wanted to talk to me about making things. And like, I feel like a lot of people haven't made anything maybe since they were in school. And I think it just like, it kind of thrilled them. And also I feel like there's something about like working while you're talking to somebody that sort of like makes the conversation easier. And I feel like I did end up talking about politics with a lot of people, and it was interesting because it wasn't like, it was just the work that I was doing along with it. So somehow it made it an easy conversation to slide into. But I also felt like with the printing at the events, people were so excited to be a part of the screen printing process. They were thrilled.
As someone who was there and watching people pass by and just being mesmerized by what was going on, it was really amazing to see the power of art just draw people in. And so I saw people who weren't friends yet or aware of each other, right? Suddenly start conversation with each other about like what their community needed or even ask, how can I get involved? I see you want to make a park. I have software engineering skills. And they raised their hand and made a connection with the local community group. So it was sort of kind of amazing to see people connect over art and connect over political topics in a way where they might not have otherwise done so. So I think that was really powerful, Helen and Ondine.
Thanks, Sharon.
Yeah, I had the privilege of sitting on the panel reviewing the commission projects. And one of the things that stood out to me, and I think to the panel at large about this particular project, is how often do people get to screen print for free in an open space? Like it even, there's this process of learning and of engaging about politics in discussion, but the entry point is so engaging and appealing and not something that most people would have access to without, renting out an expensive studio or some types of resources that are just typically not available for free, especially during COVID.
Yeah, it was really fun to see people, they say, oh, that's how it works, or that's what a silkscreen is. And in the video, I went over 4 times and the ink's all sticky, like the wind is blowing, and a fancy good printmaker, it's one draw and you're done. It's perfect. So I didn't want to mess up the shirts. I didn't want to, upset the children, but they were cute. They were like lined up with their stuff, and we just did our best. They were very engaged. People seemed very engaged. And when I look at the metrics, it seems like in the scheme of things, like such small numbers. But I guess on this hyper-local level, it was kind of effective. Like people were into it and we were busy the whole time. So I think it was successful. I mean, one question is also like, how could we scale this? How could we do better? How could we reach more people? Could there be different groups in each farmer's market doing this for elections? Like, could you scale it? I think we'd need a little canopy for the sun or the weather, but it seemed like we were kind of onto something because it was really fun. But to answer, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to make a quick comment that I definitely think you guys were onto something. And Ondine, I've always felt it's kind of magical that your own choice of imagery, I think not surprisingly, is so beautifully fit to this particular mission. And this, I know it's not the only life for that work, but I love that imagery of, some kind of call and response, like that birdsong idea that everybody's got something to say and we hear that cacophony, and yet you're kind of hoping to make a connection. And I think that imagery coupled with the kind of making engagement that's been talked about so much, I think that a young person and others on the street that day, I think the combination of those two things and the fact that the imagery is waiting for some input, for me, again, it just feels like a wonderful, memorable call and response somehow, like that the kids, that making activity cements it a new way. I mean, when you see the posters from the marches and you think of, when you were making the posters on the street specifically, I love that there's such a long tradition in music that people are familiar with in the city of those posters that go up quickly to announce something celebratory. And, but it's something new. Like the poster that arrives at a march is important and plays a role, but this poster that's made as a way to talk among one another right there at the moment seems like just a really powerful part of the work. I want to congratulate you both.
Thanks, Dave.
Patricia, you're muted.
Sorry. This is really admirable what you have done, because you took a subject that could be inflammatory and made it easy to discuss by everyone.
Mm.
And that's something that more people should know how to do. And you've done it with ease and just like water flowing. And then people were sharing exactly what they want from their elected officials. You know, if you did not have this catalyst, this bridge that brought people to sharing their inner feeling about their elected officials, I don't think you would have been as successful as you were. So kudos to you guys. I mean, A-okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I also want to compliment you on presenting it in a way that really looks at the broader history of essentially agitprop or art that changes the relationship to the public. And I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit more about if there were things that you decided were inappropriate, in other words, that pushed too far the line as you were thinking through the work. So I do think the reference to the Russian Constructivist, which was a way of using contemporary graphics to transform, a society that had not modernized, had a very particular political role, and now reclaiming it in some ways, almost calling people to action through imagery that on its face wouldn't appear to be such, but the very engagement in the public space of making is transformative. And that's a kind of interesting shift in which you're looking at the role of the making of the work versus its imagery, and how you're playing that negotiation, whether or not there were imagery or processes that you decided were going to be outside of the bounds.
Well, we wanted to be very neutral and ask the questions, and to see what people's response were, and to link their wants and needs to voting. That what you need, what you want to have happen, you can vote for that. And here's the person down the street campaigning. Go talk to them. So some people on the bird question, they wrote things that, they wrote all kinds of things we thought were interesting, things that we thought were maybe not so appropriate, whatever. We were not there to judge. We put them up, and there they were. We were not curators. We were just asking the question. Does that answer your question a little bit, David?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question to raise about the relationship of art and politics. Mm-hmm. And how one negotiates that relationship to either provoke, in other words, that their idea is to produce the most dramatic imagery that in fact shocks, but that act of shocking wears away quickly, and that's we're used to it. We're used to going to things and saying, "Oh, let's look at the most outrageous poster," but it's almost expected. So what's unexpected is the thing that seems to be that opens up space and calls for other people to contemplate the very work that they would do. And I'm just curious to hear your relationship, talking about them in terms of kinds of imagery, and if you ever thought that there was a line that you had to hold to be able to not invoke that kind of neutral but provocative, paradoxically provocative position.
I think that we did talk about the kind of birds we were going to use. Like, we definitely decided like we weren't going to use any hawks or any eagles, like none of that, like kind of like powerful. Yes, we weren't going to do that. We definitely knew that we wanted it to be birds that were like about the same size as well, so that it was like kind of an equal conversation. And yeah, I mean, I think that we also knew that we wanted songbirds, so that they were just sort of neutral to some degree. But I mean, I'm not sure that there was any imagery that we were, the imagery we're working with is kind of like beautiful and benign. So I'm not sure that any of it would have, unless we used a hawk or a raptor, I'm not sure it would have gone over any bounds. But it was an interesting thing to have, like, I mean, we clearly have a political position, but we didn't share it at the event, and we didn't need to, but it was interesting, like talking to people who vehemently oppose, like we have this open street and we really want it. We weren't politicking for it at all that day. We didn't talk about it at all that day, but we do have a stance on that. And then I would say like a third of the people wrote something about the linear park open street wanting it. There was a few people that came in that were just so vehemently against it. And it was just interesting to be in a position to be like, why do you feel that way? And to just listen to them and not like I didn't feel like my role at all was to argue with them, to convince them of any other way. But it was interesting to have that conversation. It was kind of a relief actually to know that it would have been out of bounds to try to sway them in any way.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the birds you chose, Ondine, are very sweet. They're pretty, right? And they're lovely. But we did have some reaction when you did the owl for the We Are Watching. Like that was more provocative. That was to be like a scarier time, slightly, and so that choice of bird sometimes did provoke questions and a lot of discussion, right? So I think that we were trying to be kind of peaceful about it in this project, right?
Yeah.
Did anybody ask you about the birds?
A lot of people asked what kind of birds they were and like where they were interested that they were local birds, because I think a lot of people don't see anything besides like a pigeon and a house sparrow. So it's interesting when you show them these birds that are amazing and they're like, they live here.
But they didn't say something like, why are you using birds to get our political opinion or something? Like,
no, nobody. It seemed to make sense to everybody.
So I want to shift gears for just a little bit to shed light on the larger initiative that Dovecote Collective was part of. It's called the Creative Sanctum, and specifically Catalyst Commissions. And we are joined by the founder of that initiative. So I would love to hear from Sharon. If you want to talk a little bit about what is the Creative Sanctum, what are the Catalyst Commissions, and why did you feel compelled to start a fund to support art that catalyzes democracy?
So hi, my name is Sharon Chin, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Creative Sanctum. And we're a digital magazine that really promotes and amplifies the voices of artists. About 2 years ago, I started to just interview artists and write about their stories, because I thought so much of the work they were doing, so much of the creative process was just fascinating, enlightening, and really deserved to be shared and recorded. And then over time, I realized that, if we want a strong art to continue to be made, we have to support our artists. And I was a part of the QCA Artist Commissioning Program and saw the power of commissioning art. And I thought, for all of these issues that are so important, why don't we use artists in service of that? Because so many of us have something we want to say and contribute to our communities, but maybe don't have an outlet to say or do it. And artists are a really good way to channel that. And also, as Helen and Ondine have done, to get really people involved. So I was very lucky to receive a grant that allowed me to support artists in this way. So earlier this year, I started something called the Catalyst Commissions. And it's really premised on the idea that you can use art to awaken the creative citizen inside each of us. You can get the everyday man just stop on the street and talk about a political topic, which they might otherwise not want to read an essay or read a newspaper article on, but engage with because they've been touched by a piece of art. So I was really excited to build on that. And I was really lucky to partner with Queen's Council on the Arts, Think Chinatown, to make sure that the people who selected these works were from the communities. So they could be people who are, artists themselves, or people who represent museums, or just, your neighbor who's just like, I like art, or I like politics, or what is this? And they were able to be part of the process to help select art that they thought would help motivate people to get involved in these elections. David, I really love what you said about these birds being a cacophony of voices, right, of song, because I think that's also what voting is, right? It's all of us putting out our voices so we create the song of what we want our politicians to hear in terms of the path forward. So I thought this work was really, really perfect for catalyzing the vote and catalyzing what I hope will be stronger community and civic participation. So thanks, Kelly. If anyone has any questions about that, I'm happy to share more. We also have Kim Chan, one of our other artists, our catalyst description where he's on the line as well. She wrote this beautiful comic with a personal narrative about reflections of like white supremacy in Queens. Yeah, just really beautiful work.
Kim, can we put you on the spot, ask you to say hi and introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, my name is Kim Chan, and I'm one of the other recipients of Sharon Chin's or the Creative Sanctum's Catalyst commissions. And yeah, I'm really grateful to be a part of this project. In addition to Dovecote, to just be able to express ideas politically with this upcoming local election.
Thanks, Kim. And can you drop a link to your comic in the chat in case anyone wants to check it out?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's in the chat, but I can put it down again.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, so thank you, Sharon, for saying a few words about the Creative Sanctum. Are there any upcoming projects that artists should keep an eye out for in case they want to get involved with your work, either from the digital magazine side or potentially even another open call down the road?
There will always be future opportunities. So you should definitely follow my website or Instagram at thecreativesanctum.com. And we'll be showcasing more of the works of the artists from the Catalyst commissions. So when Helen and Ondine present again, we'll obviously showcase that. In Chinatown, I think we saw a lot of anti-Asian violence and harm this year. That was exacerbated by, the xenophobia that emerged from this pandemic, right? And so in response to that, one of our awardees created a community-based mural in Chinatown where everyone was taught how to crochet, and they could crochet a flower, a leaf, and together it's going to become a 24 by 4 foot mural that's going to stand in the center of Columbus Park, Chinatown, and be up for a year. And really it serves a representation of all these voices coming together, combating the experiences of anti-Asian violence, and showing, when you come to this group collectively, this is how you can change a narrative and how you can move towards, greater action. So I definitely encourage you to stay involved if you like this kind of work and projects.
If I may ask a quick question. So in terms of the Catalyst Commission, do you feel that it had directly stemmed from the 2016 election, or was this just something that you had always wanted to have?
So it's an interesting question. I think I would say I've always been a political person, but not necessarily like super politically active. And I've always believed in art and supporting artists. And I think when I sat at the QCA Art Critics Commissioning Program decision-making table, deciding how a $10,000 grant would be awarded, I saw the power of using one's voice in terms of tangible action. And it made me really think that, who else can do this? Who else can make this realization happen for people? And I thought of artists are a really strong and powerful way to do so. So I really love that idea. And I don't think it was spurred by the 2016 election. It's just something that's always been in mind, but everything builds. And I think that contributed to the project idea. I just want to turn the question maybe back to the group and just think, do you think government and artists should have a stronger relationship? And if so, how? And this is for anyone.
Lonnie, you're muted.
Well, actually, I was talking out loud and saying some exclamations I don't necessarily want to hear other people hear. But It's an interesting question, and I think about, I was with the Department of Cultural Affairs many, many years ago. But I think there is a role that can be played with government between artists. Now, exactly what that is, I can't articulate at the moment, but it is food for thought. It's definitely food for thought. And it's interesting, though, to see how many artists do end up in government one way or the other, at the part-time positions and still trying to maintain this relationship between their arts and the arts community and their responsibilities within the capacity of working for a government. For example, on a local level like DCA. Then again, I've known actors that have worked for NISCA. So yeah, that's it's an interesting question.
Yeah,
You caught me talking to myself.
I think that artists and government already have a really strong relationship, and that if you look at the local arts councils, Queen's Council on the Arts, for instance, 70 to 90% of our annual budget is funded by DCLA, the city, and most of the rest is the state. And the DCLA is the largest funder of the arts, including, it's larger than the NEA. So we're very, fortunate to have a city that supports the arts. But even if you think about what a nonprofit is, what a 501c3, it's public dollars in the sense that they are tax exempt. And so there's definitely this relationship, not to mention if you look at like public artists in residence care programs, Lonnie mentioned Department of Cultural Affairs is like Percent for Art program. I think that there's already a strong fiscal relationship between artists and government. I think the question that Sharon is getting at is like, what would a better relationship look like? Is one that's really interesting and worth thinking about.
Or where does it go from here? Those foundations have already been established. So where do we go from here?
Can I just make a quick comment that maybe relates back to Dovecote a little bit in answer to the question, Sharon? Ondine, when you're carving prints, and I know, Helen, when you're pulling silk screens, those are, as was mentioned earlier, modes of making that are slow and physical and in the world that way, in a way that's a little bit different than what we just experienced in the pandemic. So much of the making and so much of our lives have that digital filter. And I think that I think politics is a craft that toils slowly, and accomplishments arrive slowly through consistent, stubborn, persistent work. I love the idea of artists being in residence alongside politicians. That I think that for a politician to be witness to the making and see that it's a daily ritual, that it's a purposeful ritual, that it's a searching ritual. I think a politician being empowered by witnessing process and realizing like, wow, we share this. We share a daily effort to get that thing to move forward. And there was a little bit of the Dovecote thing out in the street happening in front of people with artists who are working in an analog way that for me, that all lines up beautifully.
Dave, I love the idea of like having the Senate artist in residence. Wouldn't that be the best?
Mr. Harrington, may I? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was about to say, I don't know if I would give that artist my congratulations or condolences. But certainly you can ask me anything. Hopefully I can answer it, but you can ask me anything.
Well, I was thinking of the question, like, what is the relationship between art and democracy? And so may I share a photograph, Kelly? Let's see here. Is this me? Oh, here we go. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. It's very messy. Let me see if I can find, uh-oh. I think I lost myself. Oh, here we go. Oh, here we go. Okay. So here's one of my favorite things. Can you see this picture?
Yes.
Okay. So the relationship between art and democracy is epitomized for me by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because Ginsburg, for a long time, had a Joseph Albers in her chambers, and you'll see it in the background there. And the judges, the Supreme Court justices can choose whatever they want, I think, from the Smithsonian to hang in their chambers. And she chose an Albers. And that is so poetic for me. This is a closer look at it. And it's called Variant on Tideland. And so Albers, as you all probably know, was interested in the relationship of one color to another. And this was a precursor to some of his square paintings. This was based on the doorways in Oaxaca, where he used to go to Mexico and look at the color relationships. And it's always been so kind of poetic and, I don't know, sobering to me to think that like art and democracy are similar to me because they're a shared experience. And we live in community. We're not in isolation. We affect each other. And the colors, that what he was talking about was that one color can affect another. There's a famous moment where a rumor that Albers could turn yellow black at Yale, where he taught. Like he had some sort of power to put the colors in relation to each other. So if one color changes in relation to another, I feel like another person can change in relationship to another, and that we're all in community and that we affect one another. So I'm wondering if anyone has any thoughts about that.
Helen, art is expression, right? So when you actually take the time to say what you want to say through art, you're communicating to someone else, and I think that can be so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for sharing that.
And Ondine, you were thinking about this question as well, right?
Yeah, I think that I think the relationship is for the artist to keep the government in check. I think that it makes me think of the James Baldwin quote, I love America more than any other country in this world. And exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. I think that if you're in power, there's a lot you can't see. And so you need people that aren't in power to show that to you. Like, as a woman, as a lesbian, there's things that I can see, but I feel like I'm a cisgendered white person. Like there's so much in the world that I don't see. And I feel like we need to be able to have people call out what the privileged can't see so that it can be changed or addressed.
But I think the problem has always been, no, they have to be willing to see. And that's where the problems start.
This is true. Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yes.
Well, let me just give you an example from the whole other perspective. Culturally speaking, I know that when Trump got in office, one of the first things he did was put a portrait of Andrew Jackson up. Now, all the peoples, plural, I'm descended from, Andrew Jackson for us is a personification of evil. So even now, just thinking about that gets my blood boiling. So yeah, art can have an effect. It could be for the good or the negative. And I congratulate President Biden, because one of the first things he did was remove that portrait when he got into office.
Yeah, thanks for kind of a beautiful color theory meets metaphor sort of synopsis, Helen. I definitely appreciated that. Any other thoughts on the relationship between art and democracy? Opening up the conversation to everyone, what is the relationship between art and democracy for you personally?
If I may add on to what Ondine was saying, I completely agree with what she was saying, and Mr. Harrington, and how just from what I've been taught currently in school as a returning student, they were saying that there is always going to be some kind of level of propaganda when it comes to design, but it is up to the designers to use that in a responsible way and to convey that to people. So that's kind of what I always think about when it comes to art and politics. And I guess just looking back at world history as well, what I had explained to both Sharon and yourself previously was that I guess currently in the Philippines, for example, they passed the anti-terror law, and that labels a lot of civilians as terrorists, even if they're just regular people who don't agree with what the government is doing. A lot of the people who are being labeled as terrorists are artists and activists at the same time. So there's always going to be that interplay. And as Ondine was saying, like, we always have to kind of stay on the government's toes when it comes to that. I think part of the problem is that a lot of there always has to be some level of objectivity when it comes to approaching social issues, but at the same time, at the same time, we don't live in that world that they try to project, where we are judged solely on the basis of our character. Unfortunately, that's not the reality that we're in. So in order to keep that idea alive, or to inspire other people, like, our art needs to exist for that purpose.
And let's face it, tragically, history has shown us time and time again, in times of oppression, sometimes artists are some of the first victims of that oppression.
Absolutely.
And I know we can probably all come up with numerous examples, but that's the other end of the coin.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
That actually dovetails really nicely into our next question for the group, which is, what are some examples that you can think of art catalyzing civic engagement?
I'm sitting up in the Catskills, and our next door neighbor was a close friend of Keith Harington and a collector of Keith Harington's work. And they just sponsored an exhibit at the Fenmore Museum in Cooperstown, New York, that we attended. And not unlike the Dovecote project that we just saw now, there was, it was nice to, before I went to the exhibit, I had a friend send me an image of himself as a student at LaGuardia High School. He had been invited to Keith Harington's studio, and these teenagers were in his studio making work alongside Keith Harington. And I feel like for me, that's an example. His activism through his art, has always been inspiring.
I always think of Guernica as kind of the epitome, right? The Picasso mural that was so controversial, but spurred the Spanish Revolution.
Think of music, like songs like "We Shall Overcome," and how it really drove the civil rights movement. I think of like Congressman John Lewis and what he once said. Music, the civil rights movement without music would have been like a bird without wings. And it really just goes to the power of art to propel a movement and keep democracy flowing.
That's what I great. I was thinking about song, because singing is participatory. And I think the project that we just saw is the project that Ondine and Helen was participatory, and so it's one thing is about the art, but the other piece is that the public is involved in making it. Like we are, if there's a group singing, or these marches where people start chanting the same thing. I'm thinking about, maybe Micah remembers singing your song when we marched at the Women's March, and then more and more people began singing until there were hundreds of people singing the song. And somehow, in this printing process, bring your t-shirt, bring your thing, print with us, write it pulls people along in the same way as a song, which is like I don't know if it's an added piece to the artwork or if it's a different genre, or it's not the artist in their studio thinking about politics and then portraying it to the others. It's participatory.
Mm-hmm.
It's very inspiring.
Well, that song Micah was singing at the my daughter Micah, who's there at the Women's March, was by Ella Baker, the civil rights leader, who talked about how strong people don't need strong leaders, that it's really about people taking control of their situations.
It's interesting to me that you said that people were really uncomfortable with the lack of like transaction, like that there wasn't a monetary component to the project. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I must admit that when you were presenting, the first thing that came up in my capitalist brain was like, oh, where can I buy a tote bag? Like, where can I go and like financially support you? And then you said this, people were uncomfortable with it not being an exchange. How do you think about that? Would you ever sell these works, or is it important that it's completely free and participatory in that way?
I mean, I think it was part of the structure of it that it was free. So I would say, sure, we would sell them. I don't see a problem with that, but I don't, it just wasn't that it wasn't the exchange that we wanted. We wanted people to share their ideas and we would give them something. But yeah, it's interesting. Like a lot of people were like, well, is there some place I can donate money to? Is there like, it was just, it's interesting to, I guess I hadn't realized the degree to which money is the transactional thing.
Yeah, and it can come from a good place too. Like I think for me, especially as an arts administrator, it's okay if you want to, it's a way of expressing gratitude or wanting to support artists or support what you're doing. It's like the first instinct to contribute. Yeah,
no, and that was super appreciated that people wanted to like be like, your artist, we need to support you. It was great. It was just a funny thing of like, what do we do if there's no money being exchanged? But yeah, and we did get emails from people wanting to buy the bags, and we were like, we only made a certain amount. We made like 40 or something. So we just didn't have any to sell.
Well, any other final questions for Helen, Ondine, or Sharon?
If I may ask Ondine, you don't have to answer this if you don't feel comfortable, but I was just very curious. Did your daughter write any expectations that she wanted from political leaders as well, or?
You know what? That is a good question. I don't think she did. I feel like she was like running around all day on both of the days. Like our street is open, so it's super safe for an 8-year-old to just like go running around. She had like a 3-block radius that she could just run around. So I don't think she did. That's an interesting thing though. She probably would have asked for ice cream.
It looks so sweet. Yeah, I would have just ran down the street if I was, if I was 8 too.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to observe children participating in this process, because they'd be asked, what do you want? And they'd be like, I can't vote. Or they would just look blankly. They're like, what do you mean? No one ever asked me what I want. So I thought this was a really great way to show that you can be part of this process even now and have a conversation with your parent, with us, and maybe change an outcome. And I saw so many empathetic responses, like, end hunger, give everyone housing. Like, yeah. So I think it's just a really powerful thing to see.
You're establishing the foundation for future voters.
Totally. Yeah. If we did nothing else, I feel like we would be successful if we did that.
Speaking of changing the outcome, Sharon, can you speak a little bit about just how narrow the margin of victories are for some of these local elections?
Oh, so I think Helen was saying that we only had 1 million people participate in the New York City primaries this year. And if you think about the New York City population of 8 or 9 million, right, that's a very small fraction. But shockingly, that number still represents growth over previous elections. So I think we want to remember that in these elections, particularly in New York City, in New York, which is like typically viewed as like a blue state, a lot of people don't vote because they believe like, yeah, a Democrat's going to win, so my vote doesn't matter. But if we look at all the candidates, the spectrum of political views is so varied and so diverse. So showing up and voting really does make a difference. And I think, you know, this is the first year that we've really seen ranked choice voting be implemented in such a strong and powerful way. So if you haven't voted before, really encourage you to use this as a tool, and remember that you should vote for up to 5 candidates. And even if your first choice isn't elected, your second, third, or fourth could be, and in that way, your choices could be reflected in the final outcome. Versus if you don't participate at all, or only vote for one person, you know, your opinion might not be represented as strongly.
I know this isn't a forum per se to talk about the pros and cons of the voting system. However, I do need to point out and remind everybody, independents can't vote in the primary. I know I'm an independent. So I think if independents were allowed to vote, you would see that number go up substantially.
I agree with you, but yeah.
I agree.
And also, you couldn't change your party affiliation. Like, you could register to vote up to like the end of May, but you couldn't change your party affiliation. Like, that had to have been done months before. So even if you wanted to be like, okay, I'm going to change it to be a Democrat so I can vote in this election, or a Republican, yeah, it doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. We should put that up, you know, tell the politicians we want that.
Put it on the poster.
Yeah, put the independents need to vote. I mean, need to be able to vote, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because in New York, a primary is the election. Like, I mean, it's unlikely that a Republican is gonna win at most of the offices. So I think that you can kind of figure that the Democrat who wins the primary is going to be the winner. So that means that Lonnie, as an independent, didn't get to vote.
And just going back to your original question, Kelly, I think some elections were won by as narrow as like 100 votes. So you think of an outcome being determined by such a small number of an even smaller fraction of people voting. It's easy to see how, you know, a lot of people aren't represented in that choice. The candidate will influence a lot of their outcomes.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when Helen and Ondine were showing your metrics, and you said, "Oh, this feels small," or we're kind of downplaying a little bit. But I disagree, and especially in light of like that narrow margin of victory, it is empowering to think that, you know, the dozens or hundreds of people that you interacted with really could make a difference in some of these super local elections.
Hopefully. I think the real positive thing was to see the kids. And like Lonnie was saying, like maybe we're laying the groundwork for future voters a little bit, because they were very engaged and they were asking questions and they were running home and getting their shirts and coming back, you know. So these little gestures, perhaps they are like ripples in the water.
The seeds have been planted.
Yeah.
I heard during the 2016 election, the guys that run Crooked Media podcast group said that like you need to not tell people to vote, but you need to think of themselves as a voter. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was such an interesting thing of like, that it's about like, that's just what I do. Like I get up in the morning, I have coffee. It's election day, I vote.
It's an identity.
Right.
Yeah. And going back to like your scalability question, like I can picture, you know, you're 2 people, and so you might not be able to do this in every neighborhood in Queens or in the greater New York City area, but I could picture the Dovecote Collective's website to be like, you know, this is how we did it. Here's the toolkit that people can download if you want to do this in your own community.
I love that.
I love that. That's a really great idea.
Yeah.
Can apply for funding for that idea.
I feel like it might also be interesting to do it in, I mean, in some ways, I feel like we were preaching to the choir. Like, I feel like our neighborhood probably has a lot of voters. They probably, a lot of them have similar views that we have, but it would be interesting to do it in a place that doesn't have a lot of voters and see like what kind of conversations you could have with people. Cause I do know people that are like, yeah, I don't vote. I don't like, my vote won't count. So I just don't vote. So it would be interesting to do it in different areas where there's way less voting or.
I have a question, and I've been holding this back because I don't want to get too all cultural geeky, but with that as a preface. When you chose the image of the owl, I know Jackson Heights is a very multicultural, multi-ethnic community. What kind of feedback did you get? Because certain cultures look at the owl not necessarily in a positive light. So I'm just curious, did you get any sort of, not necessarily negative feedback, but criticism about using an owl as an image?
We didn't, but tell me what cultures don't see the owl as a positive thing?
Well, many indigenous cultures, we, and on both sides of my family, have indigenous heritage. An owl, depending on when you hear it or see it, can represent death, as a matter of fact, to be quite blunt about it.
Like an omen.
Yeah, although at the same time, some of I know my relatives in Oklahoma do certain things like to bring in good spirits, you keep an owl feather above your door.
Right.
So it can go either way, but usually to certain people, when they see an owl, especially during the day, even represented in a picture, it can lead them to think of some things that are not necessarily positive. So I was just curious.
That's interesting. No, we didn't get any feedback like that. But yeah, I don't know. I also feel like that time after the election in 2016 was a really ominous time. So I sort of accept that I accept that symbolism as well. But that's really interesting. I didn't know that.
It's a perspective. It's just putting that out there, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for putting that out, Lonnie. As always, I think that's why it's important to share work with different communities and perspectives. You hear things.
I told you, you're glad I drink decaf.
All right. Well, it is 7:26. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much, Helen, Ondine, and Sharon. This was a really wonderful presentation. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your artistic process and concepts, thought processes behind with us. Thanks to all of you for spending your Thursday evening with us. And thank you to Sharon and the Creative Sanctum for funding this work and making this whole conversation about catalyzing democracy possible. Per usual, we recorded this and we'll share it on our YouTube page with all of you. Encourage you to follow Dovecote Collective on Instagram and online. And we'll be emailing you a survey in case you have any thoughts or suggestions as to how we could improve our creative conversation series. And with that, have a great evening, everyone. Be safe and hope to see you at the same time next month.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. It was a great conversation.
Everyone be well. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.